I really, really love that song. And I recently heard about something about the education of Crazy Horse, how he was educated when he was growing up, this amazing Indian chief. And so he used to go out with the hunters, you know, and learn how to hunt and provide for his community. And whenever he would get back home, his father would ask him, you know, what his experience was like, what he saw, what he heard. So he would say, I saw this amazing tree. And his father would say, well, what was the bark like on one side of the tree compared with the other side of the tree? So he'd have to relate that. And he'd say, and then I saw this amazing yellow flower. And his father would say, how many petals were on the flower? And what did the leaves look like? Were they round or were they pointed? And he'd say, I saw the grass blowing in the wind. And his father would say, how tall was the grass? How many leaves came off of the grass? What was the top of the grass like? Etc., etc., etc. So he was educated, as Native Americans were, in this very mindful way. They were taught, as they were going about their business of the day, to pay attention to what was happening. So on the program, you might have noticed there was a quote from the Buddha that says, our life is shaped by our mind, for we become what we think. Does that resonate to something, Unity? Right? I think it's the third Unity principle, right? That says thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. I'm guessing that whoever came up with that was influenced by Buddhist thought. That's my guess. So the manner in which we think creates our experiences in life. So in a very real way, the way we think is influencing everything that we feel that goes on in our world, how we act, etc. So I thought it would be really interesting today to talk about mindfulness. It's in everywhere now. It's all the rage, mindfulness, and how that relates and applies to unity and unity thought and the unity principles. So I'm just going to talk for a little bit about mindfulness and what that is, and then at the end we'll look at more directly how that relates to the unity principles, other than this third one, which it's very clear how that works. So just like Crazy Horse when he was out in the world, and like this song that I just sang, it's a very different experience that we have of life when we can kind of get out of our habitual thinking and start to open our minds and actually look around at what is there. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of that is actually accepting what's going on. So I was reading this article actually just this morning when I was doing my meditation. And it says meditation, which is what we do to practice mindfulness, one insight meditation anyway. Meditation is like giving a cow, our restless mind, a spacious pasture to graze in. He said it's not trying to achieve a restful state, which is a setup, right? It's about allowing space in our minds so that whatever is occurring, whether it's thoughts or feelings or whatever else, has some room to be what it is. So it's not about chasing all that stuff away and trying to achieve some state of nirvana or whatever else it is. It's about creating space. So when you think about it, if you're inviting someone into your home, but you haven't created a welcoming, open space for them to be, then it's not going to be a very good experience. If you have everything set up so they have to do this thing this way and they have to do that thing that way and they have to act this way and think this way, it's not going to be fun for them or for you. So it's just like creating this welcoming, beautiful space in our own minds for us to be who we are, which then allows other people to be who they are and allows us to have an experience of the world that's very compassionate and generous and open. So you could define mindfulness as paying attention to the present moment without judgment. Easier said than done. But luckily for us, it's something we can cultivate. So it's the quality and power of mind that is aware of what's happening without judging and without trying to interfere. So this is the first step. And what that gives us, we think, well, why would I not want to interfere to make things better, right? But what this mindfulness gives us is the ability then to step back, actually see what's happening with ourselves and with others, so that then we can have a wise response instead of our usual just knee-jerk reaction, which is really how most of us go through life. So it's having a clear awareness of exactly what is happening as it happens. So there's that training of noticing actually what's going on. What does the leaf look like? What does the tree look like? So this can benefit us in all aspects of our life, whether it's just our own personal happiness and acceptance, can affect our professional lives, our interpersonal and interpersonal relationships, our parenting, everything. There's a great sign in Las Vegas that someone saw that said, "You must be present to win." You must be present to win. So that's what mindfulness gives us, this ability to actually enjoy life. It also allows us to calm and quiet the mind, to open our hearts, to learn to see the different energies in your life. And I loved how that was reflected in the daily word today, this exchange of energy and this recognition of how we are related to what happens around us. And actually in yoga philosophy, there's these different layers of the body that include our environment. So instead of, us finishing here at our skin, which is actually not true, we're constantly, every time we breathe out, we are sending out a bunch of cells that you then are breathing in. Every time we eliminate, it's food for the ground. So everything is exchanging all the time. We're constantly exchanging with other people and with the universe as a whole, with all of creation. So there's this beautiful story to represent mindfulness and how effective it is. And it actually is about a guerrilla researcher named George Schaller. So I don't remember exactly when he was doing his work, or maybe he's still active. But he was having a lot more success with the gorillas, being able to be among them and observe and collect data than other researchers were. And so they asked him, they asked him what it was that he did that was different. And he said, "I don't carry a gun." So most of the researchers would go in ready to defend themselves and protect themselves, right? So they're on the alert, and they're not really accepting what's going on or being open. And they were in this mode of expecting threat, and therefore they were threatening. And in fact, I just saw an amazing play in Kansas City that was a collaboration between Huffington Post, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the radio program now. It's a wonderful radio program that really digs into different issues and figures out how to get behind the scenes and figure out what's really going on. And then theater. And it's called Tomorrow, Inshallah. So it's about the situation right now with Islamophobia and just people being afraid of people of that faith. And it was talking about how the people who are more aggressive are actually living in this extreme state of fear. They go out into the world thinking that any time they see someone of the Muslim faith, they're going to be, attacked, right? So that's a good example of this kind of mode. And then they're the ones who end up attacking, right? Because they're afraid of being attacked. So this guerrilla researcher just didn't carry a gun. So we can think about that in our own minds. If we're constantly judging, criticizing, figuring out how things should be different, that's like carrying a gun around ourselves, to ourselves, right? This kind of aggressive mode of feeling like things need to be different. So mindfulness teaches us to put down the gun, to leave it behind, and just step into what is our own existence, that of other people, and be more open and observant. We can now be observant because we've set aside our fear. So it's a really amazing example. So not judging, not trying to change anything, but taking a seat within the mystery of our own life experience. So this begins by honoring and observing our own body without judgment. Often in these meditation practices, you can just sit, and if you're feeling anxious or whatever it is, you can sit and just feel where that is in your body. And just notice, oh, tightness in my chest, upset in my stomach, and allow that to be. When you do that, something else arises, and you realize it's like, oh, I'm afraid. Maybe you had no idea you were afraid. And now you can say, oh, fear, fear. And just allow yourself to feel fear. So a lot of times, especially with negative emotions, we spend a lot of energy just trying to chase them away or be some other way. Instead, we can have compassion for ourselves and compassion for our fear and our anxiety and our aggression or whatever it is we're feeling, as well as our happiness and joy, and just allow them to be what they are. And then it becomes a very different experience. Those gorillas that are in our mind are no longer the enemy. They're just there. So it's a really amazing thing. So you can ask yourself, what is it we need to honor and observe about the circumstances in our lives? So that includes what is now, what is actually happening now, what is unresolved or unattended, and what is beginning, what is ending. So all those things that are going on. So it's a steadying of attention that brings wisdom, joy, ease, even when facing difficulty and challenge. It allows our well-being to grow. So when I teach yoga, I often, towards the end of the class, have people do boat pose. You guys know what boat pose is? It's where you're sitting on your tail and your feet are up, so you're like this, holding, just there, balancing. So it's a challenging posture. It takes a little bit of stomach strength. And I usually make them stay there for a while. And they're like, "Ugh." And I'm like, this is the time to practice. She's like, I don't want to come to your class. But this is the time that we get to practice being uncomfortable and yet being at ease. Knowing everything is fine. Everything is fine. I'm still here. It's just a little bit of a challenge. So we can do that in all different kinds of things in our lives. Perhaps it's a person in our life who is difficult for us. We can be in that same situation with that person creating difficulty and learn to just be mindful and say, oh, this is challenging for me. I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling aggression. Or this person may be hurting. Whatever it is. This is a place of when you can be mindful, you can step back for a little bit and stop reacting. So it's really, really a powerful thing. So when we talk about awareness, there's actually these two wings of awareness, and that was also mentioned in the reading today, this awareness that we want to have so that we can see the love and beauty in the world. So there's one wing that is mindfulness, this clear seeing of what is present here and now, recognizing what's happening and understanding and seeing it clearly. And then the other piece is loving kindness. So that's this care, loving care, from which this wise response is born out of mindfulness. So it includes compassion and kindness towards ourselves. That has to come first. If we're not feeling that towards ourselves, we're not going to be able to offer that to other people. So these two wings, it's like a bird. We can't really fly without these two wings together, awareness and loving kindness. So there's another beautiful example, story that I heard from Tara Brock about a vet who had a lot of anger issues. I think Afghanistan, he had fought in Afghanistan, and he'd come back, had a lot of anger issues, and so he'd been instructed to take a mindfulness and anger management course that included mindfulness training. So he'd been doing that for a little while and learning when he felt his anger just to breathe, and he was at the grocery store in line, and there was the clerk was attending to somebody an older woman who had a little baby with her. And they were chatting, and she was cooing with the baby and, enjoying the baby. And he was starting to get impatient. There were other people in line, and he needed to get going, and they're still cooing and talking together. He started to feel this anger rise up, right? So he just stopped, took a few breaths, and said anger, this naming practice that we can do. As soon as we name something, automatically there's a bit of distance between it and whatever, and ourselves. So he was able to do that, just breathe. He finally got up to the counter, and he was able to find in himself some compassion and the ability to say to the woman, that was a cute baby you were talking with, instead of something angry. And she said, oh my gosh, thank you so much. That's my child. But my husband was a vet like you, and he was killed in Afghanistan. And now I have to work full time. So that's my mother that cares for him and brings him in every day so that I can see him. And the vet was just like, oh my gosh, see, I'm crying. It just was such a powerful moment for him. And he realized in the past he would have just been angry and hateful towards her. And instead he was able to experience this amazing beauty, this sharing and compassion. So a really powerful thing. So we can think of it as bowing to what's happening right now. Even if it's our anger, we can stop and just bow to it and say, I honor you, I see you. So there's a beautiful tool in mindfulness teaching called RAIN. Are any of you familiar with this? So it's an acronym that helps us, because what happens is we need to be present in this moment, but usually at these moments that we need to practice this, it's the times when we are the least present, right? So we need a tool to bring us back into this presence. So that's the great paradox of mindfulness, right? When we need it the most is the moments that it's not there. So this is a way to help us remember. So the R stands for recognize, the A is allow, I is investigate with kindness, and N is non-identification or nurture or nectar. It's all three of those have been used. So what happens when we use this, and I'm going to go through it a little bit and explain what that's about, but what happens is often we're reacting from our reptilian brain, right? This, I think it's the amygdala, right? So we just fight, flight, freeze. That's our reactions to most things that are challenging. And so RAIN, when we're able to do this, when we're able to activate awareness and presence and mindfulness, it shifts us into this attitude of attending and befriending, which is actually the frontal cortex, which is the most recently evolved part of our brains. So actually when we do this, we're like moving through evolution into a higher state of being. So there's a story about the Buddha. So Mara is this kind of demoness or demon that would visit the Buddha. So it was, lust and desire and anger and whatever, fear, all those things. And so Mara would visit the Buddha when he was under the Bodhi tree, right, waiting. And even after he awakened, Mara would still visit him. So this is an example about what he would do with Mara. So it's much like Jesus when he went into the wilderness for 40 days and the devil came to tempt him with all kinds of things, right? This is our practice, right? In Buddhism, they say, my enemy, my teacher. So this is how we get to practice. So he had an assistant, Ananda, who was there to help him with everything that was going on and to tend to kinds of details and make things a little bit smoother in his day. So Mara came one time to visit the Buddha, and Ananda encountered him first and said, no, you're not going to disturb the Buddha. He doesn't want to see you. And then he went to the Buddha and said, Mara is here and insists on seeing you. And he said, oh yes, invite Mara in, no problem, invite Mara in. So Mara came in and the Buddha looked at him, just approached him, looked at him, and said, I see you. So that's the recognition. First, just recognizing, I see you. I see you fear, I see you anger. No judgment, just I see you. And then he said, come in, I've prepared some tea for you. Sit in this most comfortable chair, and here, have this cup of tea. So that's the acceptance part. A, acceptance. So R is for recognizing, and A is for acceptance or allowing. Just allowing Mara to be there with him. And then as they took their tea together, we get into I, investigate. So he's like, so what's happening? What's going on? What can I do for you today? So this is a very powerful practice. You can practice it yourself. Often for me, it's at night when fear comes. And if I'll just do this, I think of inviting my fear into tea, a big demon at the door, and instead of chasing it away, barring the door, running out the back, whatever we initially think we might want to do, hide in the closet, instead we just go to the door. And I like to think of it as like a friend who's in extreme distress, who's just out of her mind in distress. And instead of running away, I'm just going to say, come in, sit down. What can I do for you? You'll be amazed at what your fear or your anxiety has to tell you. What can I do for you? What do you need to tell me? Amazing, amazing gifts that come out of that. So that's the allowing. And there was a beautiful demonstration of this. There was an experienced meditator and psychologist and he was in the early stages of Alzheimer's. And he was giving a talk about mindfulness. And in the middle of his talk, the Alzheimer's kicked in, and he forgot where he was, he forgot what he was doing, he forgot what his talk was. And so he just stopped. He stopped and he said, anxiety. And then he bowed. And he stopped again. Afraid. Bow. Stopped again. Confused. Bow. When he finished that process, he just looked out at the audience and said, I'm sorry. I don't remember. And it was an extremely powerful experience for those who were there to listen. They'd never seen it demonstrated that way. They just heard it talked about. So here was someone who was living it in a very intense kind of situation. So a really beautiful thing, this idea of bowing and honoring all that's going on. And I recently did a course called The Power of Awareness with Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield, and what they would say is that pausing, this stopping at the beginning to recognize what's there, to allow it, is the beginning of all healing practices. So whatever is going on with you, this is the beginning. And Tara has this beautiful saying that I like to remember that says, "This too." So when we're sitting with something, maybe initially we're sitting with something and we just want the answer, right? I feel angry at my sister. Why is that? Let me sit with that, and I want the answer. So we sit for a moment, and then we realize it's like, oh, I feel insecurity, right? And then the insecurity starts to grow and get bigger, and anxiety comes, and it's like, oh, anxiety. Then maybe it's fear. So things transform as we sit with them. But it's okay. Everything you just say this to. The next thing that comes up, you just sit with that and allow it and practice rain with that. And through this process, it's extremely powerful. We learn a lot of things. So the investigating part, when we're sitting having our tea, we can say, what am I believing right now? What am I thinking about? Where do I feel this in my body? What is the felt sense of what I am feeling? What is the quality? So just this, like a child, investigating, asking ourselves these questions about what is going on. So it's not just thinking. It's not thinking about it. It's just being open and asking ourselves questions. So the final N, the N, is non-identification, which is a kind of abstract term. And at first I was like, what? What does that mean? And I was actually driving home last November from talking here. So in Lawrence, we have these beautiful Christmas lights downtown. We have a really nice downtown, these beautiful Christmas lights that are on between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so it must have been sometime during that period, and I hadn't really seen the lights. So I thought, I'm going to drive down Mass Street. I was a little tired. I'd been up since early and driven here and all of that, given the talk. But I was like, I'm just going to take a few moments and see the lights. So I start down Mass Street, and it's about 6 blocks long, right? The first block, I'm like, okay, cool, this is nice. The next block, there's a car in front of me that's going really slowly, like really slow. And I'm starting to get a little aggravated. My mindful, peaceful self is not very present. So, I'm like, okay, all right, I guess they're just looking at the lights. The next block, they're going even slower. The light in front of us turns, and there's a lot of traffic on Lawrence on Mass Street. The light turns green, and they don't go through it. They're like going so slow, just creeping along. And I'm like, okay, now I'm starting to cuss, right? My road rage is coming out, and I'm surprised at myself, and I'm judging myself for being that way, but at the same time it's happening, it's just getting stronger. BJ's like, uh-huh. So we go into the next block, and by now I'm like, whoa, and suddenly, awareness. And I'm like, whoa, that is my impatience, and I just started to laugh. And as soon as I noticed what it was, everything turned friendly. I just laughed at myself. Suddenly it's like, no longer is impatience in the driver's seat, because that's where she was before. When I recognize her, now she's sitting next to her. And Elizabeth Gilbert, if you've not read Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert is the one who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. If you haven't read Big Magic, read Big Magic. There's a whole segment in there about her letter to fear. And so she says, we all have fear. We all have fear. So I recognize that fear is always going to be along with me all the time. So I wrote fear a letter, and I said, you are welcome on my journey. I know you're going to come anyway, so, here's your seat. You can sit right here, but I've got a few rules for you. Number 1, you're not allowed to drive. I'm doing the driving. Number 2, you can't touch the radio dial, etc. So basically, it's like fear's going to be there, but she's going to stay in the driver's seat. And that's what happened when I had that experience. That's non-identification. Suddenly, it's not my impatience that's deciding everything. Before that, I was totally identified with impatience. Impatience is running the show, and I'm along for the ride in the back seat, right? Now suddenly, I'm not identified with patience anymore. I'm just laughing at the situation. I recognize, oh, that's what that is. I could have some compassion for myself. Oh, I'm human. I just had a moment of extreme impatience, and I could just set it aside, and I relaxed and enjoyed the rest of my ride. So it changed everything about my experience of the moment. And then some people add S to RAIN, which is self-compassion. So an extremely important part. First, we have to have compassion for ourselves. So in closing, I just wanted to look back at the principles. So we know this first one, we are co-creators with God, creating reality through thoughts held in mind. So that's that quote that the Buddha said, our life is shaped by our mind, for we become what we think. Only when we develop this mindfulness can we really become aware of the moment without judgment and truly tap into this creative power that we have within us. And then the first and second principles basically say the world is good and people are good. So likewise, if we're not in a state of mindfulness and awareness and acceptance, we can't see that goodness most of the time or a lot of the time. Everything's covered up by our anger and anxiety and fear and reaction, right? This carrying the gun around. So this allows us to really step into those two principles. And the fourth principle, through prayer and meditation, we align our heart-mind with God. So this, for me, is the actual practice, actually practicing mindfulness. Just because we study it for a while or we meditate for 10 years doesn't mean Mara's not going to show up, right? Or fear is not going to be there. We're human. Those things happen. So we continue to practice. The more we practice, the more skillful we get at recognizing, allowing, investigating, and non-identifying. And then the last one, through thoughts, words, and actions, we live the truth we know. So for me, that's that wing of loving kindness. So once we've allowed ourselves to step into this practice of mindfulness, we can then react to the world, respond, I should say, instead of react, respond to the world out of compassion and love, the state that we really want to live in. So for our meditation today, I wanted to read a poem of Rumi's that represents this really beautifully. So instead of having the music first, I'm going to just ask you to find a comfortable seat, feel your connection to the earth, where you're sitting or your feet on the ground, perhaps have a long spine so that your breath can flow easily in and out. And I'll read this poem, and then I will play a little bit of music. And then there will be some silence for you to just absorb this message. If you want to practice that, idea of thinking in your body, what you feel, totally fine. But I just ask you to kind of allow your minds to be clear and then notice whatever is there and start to ask yourself some of those investigative questions in that open space.